For years, my work as chief hydrologist with the National Disaster Prevention Agency had taken me all across the country. Flood risk assessments, water management policies, and emergency response plans. These consumed my life, day in and day out. My spouse, Anya, often joked that if there was so much as a puddle in the street, I'd be out there measuring the water level. We both agreed that it was time to find some semblance of a normal home life, especially for our two children, Oliver, age 10, and Michelle, age 7. At first glance, High Point Acres seemed like a suburban dream. Nestled in a quiet corner of the American Midwest, the neighborhood boasted tidy lawns, tree-lined streets, and a reputation for well-organized community events. Not to mention, it was close enough to my agency's regional headquarters that I could manage my duties without excessive travel. So when an attractive two-story house with a sprawling backyard went on the market, we jumped at the chance to set down roots. Our first impression of High Point Acres was positively idyllic. Neighbors exchanging friendly waves, children riding bikes, dogs on leashes trotting happily beside their owners. After living in cramped apartments near major river systems, where I was constantly on call for potential floods, this tranquility felt like a welcome change. We hoped it would become the perfect environment for our family. Yet as soon as we arrived, I noticed one figure watching our moving truck intently from across the street. A woman in her 50s, with carefully styled hair the color of frosted blonde, wearing a pastel cardigan and an expression of unmistakable authority. She hovered by her mailbox, eyes fixed on our moving crew, a clipboard tucked under her arm. A neighbor ambled by as I stood by the truck, instructing the movers. He introduced himself as Raymond Brown, a cheerful retiree. With a glance toward the woman across the street, he lowered his voice conspiratorially and said, "That's Bernice Ardsley, but everyone calls her Karen behind her back, if you catch my drift. She's the head of the HOA. He offered a wry smile. "Watch out for that one. She's got an opinion on everything in High Point Acres." I nodded, not entirely sure what to make of it. I'd dealt with demanding people throughout my career, politicians, corporate leaders, even frantic mayors during catastrophic floods. Surely I could handle a neighbor who was particular about the rules of her HOA. We were used to living under local regulations anyway, especially since my professional life revolved around following strict standards for public safety. With that in mind, I waved politely to her. Karen smiled back in a tight, practiced way, then marched over. "Greetings," she said, glancing at the swirl of moving boxes. "You must be the new owners. Welcome to High Point Acres. I'm Ms. Ardsley, the HOA chair." I extended a hand. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Dr. River Alcott. My friends call me River. My spouse, Anya, is inside, and those two little ones are Oliver and Michelle." Karen offered a brisk, perfunctory handshake. "River, yes. We at High Point Acres keep a very tight ship. Uniform landscaping standards, garbage can rules, you name it. I trust you've read the guidelines in full detail." I gave a polite nod. "We've gone over them, yes. We look forward to following the community rules." I hadn't had time to memorize every bullet point, of course, but I knew the basics. Lawn height restrictions, approved paint colors for fences, rules about parking on the street. Standard HOA stuff. She seemed to size me up, her eyes drifting toward our moving truck again. "Well, you should be aware that I keep close tabs on any changes to properties. We want to preserve the charm and integrity of High Point Acres. No unsightly modifications, especially anything that might affect the water retention basins near the park. I chair the Flood Prevention Subcommittee as well." Something about the way she said Flood Prevention Subcommittee made me smile inwardly. I was, after all, the chief hydrologist for the entire region. But I figured it would do no good to trumpet that fact right away. "Understood," I replied. "Actually, water management is an area of personal interest. I might even be able to help if there are any local concerns." Karen gave me a sharp look that suggested she didn't appreciate unsolicited offers of help. "Well, we have everything under control. Just follow the HOA standards, and we won't have any issues." Then, with one curt nod, she pivoted on her heel and walked away. Raymond watched her retreat, shaking his head with a bemused grin. "You haven't seen the half of it," he muttered. "Good luck, neighbor." I hoped that Karen's overbearing manner was just an overblown rumor. Yet as I resumed directing the movers, I felt a flicker of apprehension. Something told me that beneath the manicured lawns and friendly waves lay a far more complicated dynamic, one that might test both my patience and my professional expertise in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The day after we moved in, Anya suggested we take a stroll around High Point Acres to familiarize ourselves with the amenities: the community park, the small pond near the entrance, the tennis courts, and the children's playground. Oliver and Michelle bounded ahead, chasing each other, while we walked at a leisurely pace through the sun-dappled streets. In one corner of the neighborhood, we noticed a system of swales and channels leading to a wide, man-made retention basin. A small sign read High Point Acres Flood Control Infrastructure, authorized personnel only. The gates were locked, and the chain-link fence was topped with barbed wire. At a glance, it was standard stormwater management design for a suburban community in a region prone to heavy rainfall during certain months. "That's interesting," Anya observed. "Looks like they've invested quite a bit in stormwater engineering for a little suburban area." I nodded. "It's fairly modern. Probably installed after the last major flooding event in this region, maybe a decade ago. The slope and channel design are well planned. This place must have had a capable hydrologist involved." I had half a mind to reach out to the local municipality for more details, purely out of professional curiosity. Just then, Karen appeared out of nowhere, wearing a crisp navy windbreaker embroidered with the HOA logo. She seemed to have an uncanny talent for materializing whenever we paused to look at something. "Admiring our flood control zone?" she asked, her tone far too bright. "We ask residents not to loiter here. It's part of our critical infrastructure." Anya and I exchanged a look. "We were just walking," I said. "I'm impressed by the design. It's quite robust." Karen frowned, clearly not expecting a compliment on engineering. "Yes, it's robust," she said slowly, "but sometimes these retention basins are, well, visually disruptive. We're exploring whether to scale back parts of the system. Some neighbors think the fencing is unsightly." "Scaling it back?" I repeated, genuinely puzzled. "But if the retention capacity is reduced, that might raise flood risks during extreme storms." Karen huffed, as if offended that I would question her. "High Point Acres has never had a major flood. Besides, it might not even be necessary to keep all those channels and basins at full capacity. They consume a lot of space that could be used for more aesthetically pleasing landscaping." Before I could respond, she gave a tight-lipped smile. "Anyway, enjoy your walk. But do remember, the community covenants discourage undue concern over the flood infrastructure. The subcommittee handles that." She marched off, leaving Anya and me blinking in surprise. "What does discourage undue concern even mean?" Anya asked, baffled. I shrugged. It might just be her way of saying she doesn't want residents meddling. But it's strange that she'd want to reduce capacity. That's never wise, especially with climate patterns these days. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. As a hydrologist, I knew all too well that well-designed flood controls are essential, even if they aren't always pleasing to the eye. I couldn't help suspecting that Karen's push for a sleeker aesthetic was overshadowing the real safety needs of the neighborhood. Still, I reminded myself that I was here to start a more relaxed life, not to micromanage the local water systems. We finished our stroll, noting the various improvements the HOA had implemented: flower beds lining the park, color-coordinated mailboxes, uniform fences. On the surface, everything was pleasant. But beneath that calm exterior, something felt off. A small voice in my head told me that before long, my professional instincts and Karen's iron-fisted approach to beautification would collide. A week later, I was invited to my first High Point Acres HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a medium-sized building near the playground. The room was arranged in neat rows of folding chairs, facing a podium flanked by oversized charts illustrating property guidelines. About 30 residents showed up, including Anya and me. A large banner read, "High Point Acres, where unity and aesthetics meet." Karen presided at a long table with two other HOA board members: Mary Fields, who seemed shy and avoided eye contact, and Thomas Graham, who mostly scrolled on his phone until Karen elbowed him to pay attention. There was an official agenda printed out on pink paper. I scanned it. Lawn and hedge compliance, trash bin visibility violations, street parking limitations, flood control maintenance and potential changes, open floor for resident concerns. After the usual remarks about lawn mowing heights, trash can screening, And how many vehicles could be parked on a driveway? Karen moved swiftly to the flood control topic. She cleared her throat, adjusting the microphone so her voice echoed throughout the room. As many of you know, she began, our retention basins and channels occupy a significant area behind the tennis courts. We pay an external contractor to inspect them annually, which has become quite expensive. We've also received feedback that the fences and channels are eyesores. She paused, glancing around the room. With that in mind, the Flood Prevention Subcommittee proposes downsizing certain sections of the system, possibly removing a few channels and regrading the land for a more aesthetically pleasing park extension. A nervous rustle swept through the audience. One older man with thick glasses lifted a hand. But those channels prevent overflow in heavy storms, he said. We had a big storm last year. It might have been worse without the system. Karen smiled thinly. Yes, Mr. Porter, but the storm didn't flood High Point Acres, did it? So there's reason to believe the system may be overbuilt. I exchanged a look with Anya, feeling my pulse quicken. The man's concern was valid. Overbuilt is a questionable term when dealing with flood risk, because so-called overbuilt systems might be precisely why the community never sees severe flooding. I raised my hand. Karen acknowledged me with a nod. Yes, new resident, River, right? Yes, I replied, clearing my throat. I'm concerned about reducing the capacity of a system that is specifically designed to protect us against the kind of once-in-a-decade or even once-in-a-century storms. The fact that we haven't had a flood is typically a sign the infrastructure is doing its job, not that it's unnecessary. Karen's smile tightened. Do you have credentials in flood management, River? A few neighbors turned to me, curious. My professional background wasn't widely known yet. I glanced at Anya, who gave me a nod of encouragement. Well, actually, I said carefully. I'm a hydrologist by training, chief hydrologist for the National Disaster Prevention Agency in this region. I've studied flood systems extensively. At once, a stunned hush fell over the room. Karen's eyebrows shot up. Oh, she said, her tone laced with surprise and an edge of defensiveness. Is that so? Yes. My job involves designing, reviewing, and improving flood mitigation strategies. Downsizing the system without thorough risk analysis could endanger homes if we get a major storm event. A murmur spread among the neighbors. Some nodded in agreement, relief evident on their faces. Others looked uncertain, torn between trusting Karen's leadership and deferring to an obvious expert. Karen tapped a pen against the table, regaining composure. I see. Well, we appreciate your input, but let's not jump to conclusions. The subcommittee has reviewed some data. It seems we're quite safe. An older woman named Mrs. Bateman raised her hand. I'd like to hear more from River, if that's okay. Perhaps the HOA could coordinate with the National Disaster Prevention Agency. Karen's expression soured. She forced a laugh. That might be excessive. We're just exploring options, not making any final decisions tonight. We'll schedule a formal review with a local engineering firm soon. Turning to me, she added, I'll keep your perspective in mind, River. The tension in the room was palpable. I nodded politely, not wanting to escalate. Thank you. I'm always happy to lend professional insight or help connect the HOA with credible experts. Karen offered a curt smile, then swiftly moved the meeting onto the next agenda item, open floor. A few residents brought up minor issues, like street lamp outages or new playground equipment, but the tension from the flood control debate lingered. Eventually, Karen adjourned the meeting, and people filed out. As I gathered my coat, one man approached, introducing himself as Daniel Reyes. He shook my hand. Glad to have you here, River. Karen's been pushing the idea of scaling down the flood infrastructure for a while, mostly because she hates how it looks. It's good to have a real expert in the neighborhood. He lowered his voice. Just be careful. Karen can be vindictive. I thanked him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Karen shot me a chilly glance from across the room before stepping out. Something told me the battle over the flood control system had only begun. In the weeks following the HOA meeting, life at High Point Acres seemed outwardly normal. I continued my day-to-day routine, splitting time between my office in the city and occasional site visits across the state to review levees, spillways, and dams. At home, Anya and I helped the kids adjust to their new school, joined a weekend barbecue at a friendly neighbor's house, and began landscaping our backyard with colorful shrubs and a small herb garden. But beneath that veneer of suburban calm, subtle tensions brewed. Karen's presence loomed in the form of official letters from the HOA, often citing minor violations or reminders. One week, we received a notice about the improper shade of mulch weed used in our flower beds. Another letter claimed that our mailbox's post was slightly leaning, instructing us to straighten it immediately. While other neighbors also got these notices occasionally, it seemed we were singled out more frequently, and for increasingly trivial issues. I started hearing through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen told people I was overstepping by questioning the flood infrastructure plan. Mary Fields, the timid board member, quietly confided in me that Karen had rallied a small group of loyal residents who believed aesthetics should trump what they called doomsday engineering. Meanwhile, the official review of the flood system began. Karen hired a small local firm, one with minimal flood modeling experience, to conduct a feasibility study on downsizing channels and removing portions of the retention basins. I tried contacting them to share data from the National Disaster Prevention Agency, but they never returned my calls. It was clear Karen wanted to control the narrative, pushing for a preordained conclusion that the flood infrastructure was excessive and unsightly. Late one night, as I was unwinding after a grueling day of state-level briefings on upcoming storm predictions, my phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor. "River, come quick to the retention basin near the tennis courts. Something's off." My heart thumped. I threw on a jacket and hurried outside, explaining to Anya that I needed to check what was happening. At the chain-link fence, a small group of residents stood shining flashlights into the dark. Water trickled from a channel gate that was supposed to be sealed at this time of night. Typically, the system had automated gates controlled by sensors that detect water levels. If the main inlet was tampered with, it could drain more or less water than intended, a subtle sabotage capable of undermining the entire design. I examined the gate mechanism and found fresh tool marks on the lock. Whoever tampered with it had forced the gate open so that water was flowing out of the basin prematurely. If left unchecked, it would compromise the normal infiltration timeline, potentially damaging the banks or letting silt build up in the wrong places. In a serious storm, this misalignment could cause water to back up or overflow. "Who would do this?" muttered a resident named Elaine. "This is insane." I inspected the hinge. "I'm not sure," I said slowly, "but it's definitely intentional vandalism, not a random break. We need to fix it immediately and notify the HOA and local authorities." We managed to secure the gate with a temporary clamp, but my mind reeled. Could someone in the neighborhood, a person who viewed the flood infrastructure as a nuisance, be deliberately sabotaging it? Karen's preference for removing or minimizing the channels was well known. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but the incident set me on edge. Elaine nodded. "We'll call the police and file a report. This sort of thing shouldn't be taken lightly. It could cause real problems." I agreed wholeheartedly. Once the gate was stable, we parted ways in the hush of the night. As I returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling that these minor sabotage attempts might escalate, especially if the culprit remained undetected. If a major storm struck, a single, well-placed act of vandalism could put the entire neighborhood at risk. Anya greeted me at the door with worry etched on her face. I explained what happened, and she shook her head in disbelief. "I don't like this, River," she said softly, rubbing my arm. "You should talk to the city officials or your contacts. This goes beyond an HOA squabble." I nodded, hugging her. "I will. First thing in the morning, I'll talk to the local water management department. They need to know about this." Yet in the back of my mind, I already feared the possibility that if Karen or her allies were behind the sabotage, they'd only grow bolder. And if some bigger plan was afoot, to quietly disable the system to prove it wasn't needed, we might be racing against the clock to stop them before real disaster struck. Summer drifted into early fall, bringing the region's rainy season closer. Meteorologists began forecasting heavier than usual rainfall for the next few months, citing atmospheric patterns and changes in the jet stream. In my official capacity, I spent long hours reviewing hydrologic models, ensuring that levees and flood control systems across the state were prepared. Unfortunately, that included staying alert to the potential vulnerabilities right in my own backyard at High Point Acres. Despite the sabotage incident at the gate, Karen's push to downsize the retention basins seemed to intensify. She distributed a glossy brochure to every mailbox, titled, "Enhancing Our Neighborhood's Beauty, Flood Control Revisions. In it, she portrayed the existing system as an overbuilt eyesore that unnecessarily traps stagnant water. She included half-truths about cost savings and the low likelihood of flooding, quoting the small local engineering firm's incomplete findings. Reading through it, my jaw clenched. The tone was manipulative, focusing on the aesthetic benefits of removing metal fences and reclaiming green space, while blatantly downplaying the potential risks of a catastrophic flood. Nowhere did the brochure mention that heavy rains were expected or that a partially disabled system would be ill-equipped to handle a true deluge. At that month's HOA meeting, the tension was palpable. Karen strutted to the podium, brandishing a pointer to highlight her slides. "Our neighbors have voiced concern over the fences and these unsightly channels," she announced. "We should reclaim the land for a children's picnic area, perhaps even a small orchard." The new plan includes partial removal of the eastern channel and reducing the depth of the retention basin by at least 3 feet. I raised my hand. With all due respect, that reduction in depth could severely limit the basin's holding capacity during peak rainfall. If a 100-year storm event hits, the water might spill into the streets, flooding basements, or worse. Karen's brows furrowed. "Again, River, we appreciate your professional background, but we have a local firm that's vetted the data. And we're not in a floodplain, you know." I swallowed my frustration. The concept of a floodplain can be misleading. Urban flash floods can occur outside of designated plains, especially if the infrastructure that disperses the water is compromised. Our region is also seeing climate patterns that increase the intensity of storms. Some residents, including Raymond Brown and Daniel Reyes, nodded in agreement. Others, enthralled by the brochure's pretty pictures of hypothetical orchard trees and picnic tables, seemed swayed by Karen's pitch for a visually appealing transformation. Mary Fields, the timid board member, merely looked down at her lap. One man asked, "But if we don't reduce it, are we just stuck with this fence and channel forever? They're kind of ugly." I tried to keep my tone calm. There are ways to landscape around a properly maintained flood system, using native plants, creative fencing, and so on, without risking capacity. I'm more than willing to help design a compromise if the HOA is open to it. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll take that under advisement. However, the board will soon vote on finalizing these changes, pending the results of our engineering report." I recognized a stone wall when I saw one. After the meeting, I stayed behind, attempting to approach Mary and Thomas, Karen's fellow board members. But they had little to say. Thomas brushed me off, mumbling that he trusted Karen's leadership. Mary seemed sympathetic but too afraid to speak against Karen openly. As I walked home, a knot formed in my stomach. My attempts to provide rational, science-based input were being drowned out by Karen's single-minded fixation on making High Point Acres beautiful by her standards. I worried that the sabotage attempt we'd seen at the channel gate was just the beginning. Someone, perhaps acting on Karen's rhetoric, might try a more drastic move to prove that the system was unnecessary. And with the region heading into a season of heavier rainfall, we were running out of time. One late evening, near midnight, I sat in my home office poring over weather data. A major storm front was predicted to sweep across our state in a few weeks, carrying unusually high levels of precipitation. I'd updated my agency's guidelines for local municipalities, urging them to clear drainage systems and ready their flood protocols. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. Fearing it could be an urgent matter, I answered. A muffled voice said, "Check the basin pumps tonight. Someone's tampering with them." Then the line went dead. My heart slammed against my ribcage. I recognized the mention of basin pumps. Although High Point Acres primarily relied on gravity-driven channels, there was a small auxiliary pump system used during extremely high water conditions to move water into the main retention pond. If those pumps were destroyed or sabotaged, the neighborhood would be far more vulnerable. I sprang from my chair, grabbing a flashlight, and hurried out. Anya, hearing the commotion, asked what was wrong, and I explained. She insisted on coming along, worried for my safety if there was a vandal still on the premises. We left Oliver and Michelle with a trusted neighbor, then quietly made our way toward the locked perimeter fence around the mechanical building that housed the pumps. The night air was damp and cool. Streetlights cast long shadows across the deserted sidewalks. As we neared the basin facility, I spotted a faint glow of light inside the fenced area. Someone was there. We crouched behind a row of hedges, peering through the chain-link fence. Inside, a hooded figure kneeled beside the pumps, fiddling with wires. My stomach twisted. One spark or wrong connection could blow out the entire control panel. Suddenly, the figure glanced over their shoulder. I pressed myself closer to the hedge, but the silhouette of my face might have been visible in the glow. The intruder swore under their breath, then leapt to their feet, sprinting away. I barely had time to react before they scaled the fence and vanished into the shadows. Heart pounding, I shouted, "Hey, stop!" But they were already gone. Without hesitation, I ducked through a gap in the fence. Someone had cut it open recently and approached the pumps. Anya followed cautiously. A quick inspection under the flashlight beam revealed that the saboteur had clipped several wires leading to the backup generator. The main pumps were still intact for now, but the generator system looked compromised. If we lost power during a storm, the pumps would be useless. "This is no random act," I said grimly. They knew what to cut. Anya's expression hardened. "We need to call the police." We immediately reported the incident. Soon, a patrol car arrived, and 2 officers took our statements. They examined the fence and the clipped wires, shaking their heads. "We'll file this as attempted vandalism," one officer said. But without a clear ID on the suspect, it might be hard to catch them. As we left, a swirl of emotions battered me. Anger, frustration, worry. High Point Acres was becoming ground zero for sabotage. Someone wanted to disable the flood system, a system that might be crucial in the coming weeks. The real question was, who was behind this, and how far would they go? The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, requesting that we gather at the clubhouse to discuss the sabotage. Karen arrived last, seeming irritated as if she were being inconvenienced. When I explained what had happened at the pump station, she appeared taken aback, just for a moment, then regained her composure. "Well," she said, clasping her hands in front of her, "it's certainly troubling that someone would vandalize our property, but I have no idea who would do such a thing." Her tone was blasé, as though discussing a minor graffiti incident. I pressed on. "Whoever it was, they specifically targeted the backup generator. The fence was cut. This isn't random mischief, it's calculated. If we get a strong storm and the power goes out, the pumps won't run." Mary Fields swallowed nervously, looking at Karen. "This could be really dangerous if the water rises." Karen pursed her lips. "We should get a repair estimate, then install better locks on the fence. Let's not blow this out of proportion." I took a measured breath. I have reason to believe it may be connected to the push to downsize the system. We've already had sabotage at the channel gate, and now this. Someone is systematically undermining the infrastructure to prove it's not necessary or to degrade its functionality. A hush settled. Thomas Graham glanced at Karen, then said softly, "If that's true, we need the police or someone to investigate thoroughly." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "We can notify the local authorities, but there's no reason to suspect anyone in the neighborhood is behind it. Let's not spread baseless accusations." I realized then, Karen was deflecting. The tension in the room was thick. Several board members eyed her warily. They weren't oblivious to the possibility that her vocal stance against the flood control measures might have emboldened an extremist or even implicated her directly. At last I stood. "Given the upcoming heavy rainfall, I propose we hire a professional security firm to guard these facilities until the sabotage is resolved. I'm also volunteering my agency's resources for a thorough structural review, free of charge. We need to be sure everything is in top shape, and that whoever is doing this is stopped." Mary and a handful of others murmured agreement. Karen, however, scowled. "A professional security firm? That will cost the HOA a fortune. We're not made of money." I'd anticipated this. The cost of security for a few weeks is negligible compared to the potential losses if the neighborhood floods. Not to mention personal safety. People's lives and homes are worth more than a line item on the HOA budget. Karen hesitated, scanning the room. She must have read the resolve on everyone's faces. Reluctantly, she relented. "Fine. We can look into short-term security, but let's keep the expense minimal." We adjourned shortly after. As I walked away, Daniel Reyes caught up with me. "You notice how Karen didn't show a hint of genuine concern?" he whispered. "Not even a question about who it might be. She just wanted to brush it off." I nodded, troubled. "Yes. If she were innocent, I'd expect more alarm, or at least curiosity. We parted ways, each lost in our own uneasy thoughts. Karen's dismissive attitude seemed more incriminating than ever. Yet without definitive proof linking her to the sabotage, or proof that she'd commissioned someone to do it, I couldn't accuse her openly. The best I could do was bolster security, hoping to protect the system until the storms passed. A few nights later, I received a frantic knock at my door. It was Mary Fields, trembling and clutching a folder of documents. I ushered her inside, guiding her to the living room. Anya brought a cup of tea for Mary, who looked too anxious to sip it. I found something while organizing old files in the HOA archives, Mary stammered. Karen asked me to shred certain documents she said were outdated. But I took a look before I shredded them. She handed me the folder. Inside were typed emails and meeting notes referencing a private arrangement between the local engineering firm and Karen. The language was cryptic but hinted that Karen specifically wanted them to produce a feasibility study supporting the idea that the flood system was unnecessary. In one note, the firm's contact wrote, "We'll emphasize aesthetic improvements and minimal flood risk. Thank you for the additional stipend." The sum was listed as a consultation bonus, well above the normal fee. My eyes widened. This suggests Karen was paying them off to confirm her preconceived conclusion. But does it tie her to the sabotage? Mary swallowed hard. "Keep looking at the documents near the back." I flipped through the pages. There, I saw a brief email chain referencing an invoice for special services, with a line item reading gate alteration and auxiliary pump adjustments, consultant fees. The date matched the approximate time of the first sabotage incident at the channel gate. The next page contained a scan check from an HOA miscellaneous improvements account, approved and signed by Karen. The memo line read, "Infrastructure adjustments." A chill ran down my spine. This was damning evidence that Karen had authorized under-the-table adjustments to the gate, presumably meaning sabotage, and possibly the pumps as well. She'd hidden it by burying it among innocuous budget documents. Mary's voice quivered. I was horrified when I saw it. "I knew I had to show you. Karen told me not to bother you about anything. She's always complaining you're meddling." But I couldn't stay silent. "This is criminal, right?" I exhaled, heart pounding. "It certainly looks that way. She's effectively paying people to tamper with flood controls that protect the neighborhood. If a serious flood hit, it could be catastrophic. People could lose their homes or even their lives." Mary's eyes welled up. I never suspected she'd go that far. Anya put a comforting arm around her. "You did the right thing by coming here. We have to act on this immediately." I nodded. "I'm going to call a contact at the district attorney's office. Sabotaging flood control infrastructure is a serious offense, especially if it's done willfully. We also need to alert the police that these documents exist." Mary hesitated. "Karen will know I took them. She might retaliate." "We'll make sure you're protected," I said firmly. "Thank you for your courage. You may have saved all of High Point Acres from a disaster." As Mary left, I stood in my living room, staring at the incriminating folder. My entire career revolved around preventing floods, saving communities from water-related calamities. That the greatest threat now came from within my own neighborhood was both surreal and infuriating. One thing was certain. Karen had to be stopped, legally and swiftly, before she could finish dismantling the defenses that stood between High Point Acres and a devastating flood. While I prepared the documents Mary had given me for the authorities, local weather reports turned increasingly grim. Meteorologists confirmed that a powerful storm system, fueled by tropical moisture, was barreling toward our state. Forecast models predicted intense rainfall, possibly several inches in a single day, the kind of event that could overwhelm drainage systems if they weren't functioning at full capacity. That night, I convened a small emergency meeting at our home, attended by Daniel Reyes, Raymond Brown, Mary Fields, and Elaine from across the street. We spread out the weather maps and my hydrological models on the dining table. "If these sabotage attempts succeed in compromising the pumps and channels," I explained, "the retention basin might overflow. The streets could flood quickly, especially if the ground is already saturated. People's basements could fill with water, or worse." Elaine's voice quavered. "We have to do something. This storm is only a week away, maybe less." I agreed. "First, I'll coordinate with the local water management department and the police, providing all evidence of Karen's involvement. We'll push for an immediate order preventing any further tampering with the system. Second, I recommend we alert every neighbor that the flood control system might be compromised and to prepare for possible flooding, just in case. Daniel added. We should also see if the city can station a police detail or security guard at the pump station 24/7 until the storm passes. We spent the next few hours drafting a statement, collecting contact info for local news outlets, and planning how to distribute sandbags if it came to that. Even as we arranged these measures, I couldn't shake a sense of dread. Karen was cunning, and if she found out we were about to expose her, she might attempt one final, drastic act of sabotage before law enforcement arrived. By the following day, the police had received our evidence. The district attorney's office confirmed they were investigating. However, bureaucracy can be slow. Legal warrants and official orders might take days, possibly edging close to the storm's arrival. Meanwhile, Karen continued her daily life as if nothing was amiss, still sending out emails about beautification projects and complaining about supposedly non-compliant fences or overgrown shrubs. It was surreal. 2 days before the storm was due, I woke to a news report stating that local rivers were already elevated from earlier rains. The upcoming deluge could lead to moderate or severe flooding in low-lying areas, and High Point Acres might become a high-risk zone if the sabotage wasn't fixed. I immediately called the city water management office to expedite repairs on the pump generator, which had still not been fully addressed. They agreed to send a crew the next morning. I hung up, relief warring with anxiety. Everything hinged on that repair crew finishing their work before the storm unleashed its fury. If Karen or her contractors interfered one more time, we could be staring down a major disaster. The next morning, clouds loomed overhead, and a damp wind raked the streets. The repair crew arrived at the pump house, a couple of city technicians, and an electrician. I stood by, supervising from outside the fence, ensuring they had access to the gate. They worked for about an hour, replacing wires and testing the backup generator. The hum of machinery reassured me. If we maintained power, even if the main grid failed, these pumps would move water away from the neighborhood. Just as they were finishing, a white SUV screeched to a halt nearby. The driver's door flew open, and out stormed Karen, her face twisted in fury. "What is going on here?" she demanded, marching toward the fence. I did not authorize city crews to alter HOA property. I stepped forward, arms folded. "Karen, the city is repairing damage caused by sabotage. We have evidence that you've been paying people to tamper with these systems. The matter is in the hands of law enforcement now." Her eyes blazed. "How dare you? I've done nothing illegal. The only sabotage here is you, undermining the rightful plans of the HOA. The workers, sensing the tension, started packing up their tools. One of them gave me a discreet nod, confirming they were done. Karen slammed her hands against the fence. "You can't just waltz in and rewire everything without HOA approval. This is private property." I shook my head, keeping my voice calm. "Actually, it's an essential public safety asset. And given your documented attempts to dismantle it, local authorities have the right to intervene." She glowered, perhaps realizing the mention of documented attempts meant her hidden transactions and sabotage links were no longer secret. Suddenly, her expression morphed from anger to something close to desperation. "All of you are blind to how ugly and pointless these channels are. High Point Acres is supposed to be a pristine community, not a swamp. And you," she stabbed a finger at me, "you come here, with your fancy National Disaster Prevention title, acting like you own the place." I took a measured breath. "I don't own it, Karen. But I do understand the gravity of flood control. So do law enforcement and the district attorney's office, who will likely want to speak with you soon." She scoffed, but I caught a flicker of panic in her eyes. Without another word, she stormed back to her SUV, tires squealing as she peeled away. I watched her go, dread settling in my stomach. It felt like a direct confrontation that could spur her into more reckless acts. With the storm approaching, we had precious little time to ensure the system stayed fully operational. Within 36 hours, sheets of rain pummeled the region. The sky churned with dark clouds, and the wind howled through the trees. News stations broadcast flash flood warnings, urging residents in vulnerable areas to stay alert. At High Point Acres, tension ran high. Many neighbors sandbagged their garage entrances and basement windows, preparing for the worst. I spent the evening monitoring the retention basin levels, checking the newly repaired generator every few hours. The pumps clicked on and off, siphoning away excess water. So far, the system held steady. If it remained sabotage-free, we might be spared major flooding. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with urgent texts from neighbors. River, the water is rising fast at the eastern channel. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, telling Anya to stay with the kids in case of an emergency. I dashed out into the gale, the downpour instantly soaking through my clothes. At the eastern channel, several neighbors had gathered, shining lights into the swirling water. We saw that the flow into the basin was unusually sluggish. Could there be debris blocking the channel? Or had the sabotage reoccurred? With the help of Daniel Reyes and Elaine, we waded through ankle-deep water, nearing the channel gate. That's when we discovered the grated inlet jammed with a large chunk of plywood, secured by heavy rocks. It looked intentionally placed, another act of sabotage, meant to impede water flow into the retention basin. If left there, stormwater would back up and flood the eastern side of the neighborhood. I cursed under my breath. Somebody set this up on purpose. We struggled to remove the waterlogged plywood, nearly losing our footing in the rushing current. Each time we pried it loose, a wave of water threatened to knock us off balance. After several frantic minutes, we dislodged it, letting the channel flow freely again. The water level dropped noticeably around our ankles. Panting, we hauled the debris out of the channel. Elaine shone her flashlight on it. "There's spray paint on this piece," she said, squinting. "It says, 'Go away, Doomsday Man.'" "That's bizarre." I frowned. The phrase was scrawled in an angry, red scrawl, presumably referencing me, accusing me of being a doomsday prophet about flooding. My stomach twisted. This sabotage was personal. We trudged back to higher ground, alerting the rest of the neighborhood that we'd cleared the channel. So far, the main roads remained passable, and no houses had flooded yet. But the storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. We still had hours to go before the worst rainfall subsided. Standing in the downpour, I gazed around at the anxious faces of my neighbors, each hoping we wouldn't become the next headline of a suburban flood tragedy. With sabotage continuing in the midst of the storm, we were battling both nature and the twisted vendetta of someone who wanted to see the system fail. As the rain raged on, many neighbors decided to stay awake in shifts, patrolling key points of the flood infrastructure with flashlights and phones ready to call for help. I stationed myself at the pump house, keeping an eye on the generator that was crucial to draining overflow. The storm battered the metal roof, and the wind whipped through the chain-link fence with eerie howls. Sometime after 2 a.m., a neighbor radioed in through a walkie-talkie we'd distributed. "River, someone's heading your way. Watch out." My pulse spiked. In the distance, faint headlights bobbed along the access road leading to the pumps. Bracing myself, I flicked off my flashlight and crouched behind the fence to remain hidden. I heard the engine slow, then stop. The door slammed. Footsteps squelched through the mud. My heart thundered in my chest as the footsteps drew closer. A figure appeared, silhouetted by the swirling storm. Lightning flickered, illuminating the face. Karen. She wore a dark poncho, and her expression was a mix of determination and madness. She held a crowbar in one hand. I sucked in a breath. This was it. Karen had come to sabotage the generator. No more hiding behind contractors or ephemeral consultants. She intended to finish it herself. She yanked at the chain on the fence gate, but we'd replaced the lock with a heavy-duty one. Scowling, she gripped the crowbar, about to pry it open. Before she could break it, I flicked on my flashlight, aiming the beam right at her face. "Karen, step away," I shouted over the roar of rain and wind. "It's over. We have evidence of what you've done." She spun around, eyes wild. "You," she screamed, brandishing the crowbar. "You're the reason everything's gone wrong. You turned everyone against me, with your fear-mongering and your science talk." I held up a hand, trying to project calm authority. "You're destroying vital infrastructure. People's lives are at stake." Karen let out a bitter laugh. "No floods. We've never needed this monstrosity. All it does is ruin property values and force ugly fences on us. Don't you see that you're the villain here, preaching doom and gloom?" Lightning flashed, illuminating her contorted face. I realized she was truly unhinged, consumed by her obsession. "Karen," I shouted, "the police have your documents." The district attorney knows you paid that firm for sabotage. You can't get away with this." She flinched at the mention of the DA. Then, with a trembling grin, she raised the crowbar, as if considering attacking me or the lock. "I'll take down this generator right now, and you can't stop me." A loud voice cut through the storm. "Drop the weapon. This is the police." In that moment, two uniformed officers emerged from the darkness, guns drawn, joined by a neighbor who had called them. Karen's eyes went wide. She froze, crowbar still in hand, caught like a criminal in a spotlight. "Karen Ardsley," one officer shouted, "we have a warrant for your arrest. Put down the crowbar and step away from the fence." Her gaze darted from me to the officers. Slowly, the crowbar slipped from her fingers, clattering on the wet gravel. She put her hands up, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "This is my neighborhood," she cried. "I was only trying to make it perfect." The officers grabbed her arms and cuffed her as she continued babbling protests of innocence. Thunder rumbled overhead, echoing her downfall. I sank against the fence, relief and disbelief coursing through me. The saboteur was finally caught, literally red-handed, on a stormy night that could have spelled disaster for all of us. In the subsequent hours, the worst of the storm passed. The pumps hummed steadily, draining the retention basin into the municipal outflow systems. Despite record rainfall, High Point Acres suffered only minor street flooding. The sabotage had been stopped just in time. News spread quickly that Karen had been arrested, crowbar in hand, while attempting to disable the generator. The police also had the incriminating documents, courtesy of Mary Fields, that tied Karen to earlier acts of vandalism. Once confronted with the evidence, Karen confessed that she'd orchestrated the sabotage for months, paying off rogue workers to break gate locks, tamper with wires, and place blockages in channels. Her motive: to create a false narrative that the flood system was unnecessary and poorly functioning, thereby justifying her beautification plan to remove it. She had hoped that once the system failed, or seemed to fail, the HOA would unanimously support her push for demolition. The district attorney's office wasted no time. Karen faced charges ranging from criminal mischief to reckless endangerment. The severity of tampering with critical infrastructure only heightened the legal stakes. On top of that, the HOA board, now free from Karen's intimidation, voted unanimously to remove her from her position. Mary Fields stepped in as interim chair, collaborating with me and local officials to ensure the flood control infrastructure would remain fully operational and better protected in the future. In the days that followed, the skies cleared, revealing a neighborhood shaken but ultimately intact. I was thanked repeatedly by neighbors. Many left handwritten notes or small tokens of gratitude on our doorstep. The relief was palpable, but so was the lingering shock that one person's obsession nearly triggered a disaster. Karen's arrest led to a flurry of media coverage. Local news outlets ran headlines like "Suburban HOA Chair Arrested for Sabotaging Flood Controls" and "Disaster Narrowly Averted in High Point Acres." Interviews with neighbors painted a picture of Karen as a control-obsessed leader who valued perfect aesthetics over public safety. Some residents expressed disbelief that it had escalated this far. Others admitted they'd long felt uneasy about her extremes, but were too intimidated to speak up. Now, with Karen gone, a sense of renewed unity blossomed. Many agreed that a robust flood system could be made more visually appealing without endangering its essential function. Several local landscapers offered to propose green-friendly designs around the retention basin, so it fit more harmoniously into the neighborhood. Mary Fields officially apologized on behalf of the HOA, extending thanks to those who had saved High Point Acres from the brink of flooding: myself, Daniel Reyes, Elaine, Raymond, and others who had risked their safety on those stormy nights. A small ceremony was held by the tennis courts, where the sabotage channels were now back in proper operation. The police and city council members attended, praising the community's cooperation. In my capacity as chief hydrologist, I shared additional guidelines for how neighborhoods could merge flood infrastructure with aesthetic landscaping, introducing native plants that thrive in wet conditions, building decorative walkways, and painting murals on otherwise bland fences. The residents welcomed these ideas with enthusiasm. Oliver and Michelle, my kids, had quietly absorbed the drama swirling around them. When the dust settled, they seemed proud that their mom, Anya, and dad, me, had helped keep the neighborhood safe. "Dad, does this mean I can brag at school that you stopped a flood?" Oliver asked with a mischievous grin. I just laughed, ruffling his hair. Months later, Karen's case went to trial. The prosecution laid out a clear, methodical account of her sabotage activities. The defense attempted to frame her as an overworked volunteer who made poor decisions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, email correspondence, eyewitness testimony, and her own admission of tampering sealed her fate. The judge, stern-faced and unimpressed by Karen's pleas for mercy, delivered a scathing rebuke. He cited the potential for widespread property damage, the risk to human lives, and the premeditated nature of the sabotage. In the end, Karen was convicted on multiple felony counts of reckless endangerment, criminal tampering with critical infrastructure, and fraudulent misuse of HOA funds. Her sentence was severe, several years in prison, plus substantial fines. The court allowed the HOA and affected residents to pursue civil suits for damages. Additionally, the judge approved the confiscation of Karen's property to help pay restitution. Her once pristine house, with the meticulously trimmed hedges, went into foreclosure and was eventually sold off at auction. For many in High Point Acres, the finality of Karen's downfall felt both shocking and cathartic. She had led with an iron fist, only to lose everything. Though some pitted her, most agreed that her punishment fit the magnitude of the crime. With Karen behind bars and the flood infrastructure intact, High Point Acres settled into a more balanced routine. The new HOA leadership turned its focus to genuinely beneficial projects, repairing sidewalks, planting new trees, improving playground equipment. They welcomed input from residents, and though rules still existed, they were enforced more evenly and compassionately. As for the flood control system, we formed a neighborhood volunteer group that regularly checked the channels and pumps. We worked in tandem with the city's water management department to ensure any issues were addressed before they escalated. One sunny Saturday, the volunteers organized a community cleanup around the basin. Families brought their kids, turning it into a mini event with snacks and music. Where once barbed wire fences and plain concrete channels dominated the scene, we now had a budding landscape of native plants and artistic fencing, all carefully designed to retain the system's flood capacity. People marveled that it was possible to have both safety and beauty. Anya and I stood by the newly planted rain garden, watching Oliver and Michelle chase each other along the grassy banks. Daniel Reyes strolled over, giving me a friendly pat on the shoulder. "It's amazing how far we've come," he said. "We owe you a lot, River." I smiled, shaking my head. We owe each other. No one person could have stopped Karen alone. This was a team effort. He chuckled. "Still, you're the chief hydrologist. We're lucky you ended up here." I glanced around at the families enjoying a peaceful day, the storm dangers far behind us. "I'm lucky too. High Point Acres might have been tested by chaos, but it came out stronger." Time passed, and High Point Acres continued to thrive. Each rainy season, our flood infrastructure performed reliably, preventing even minor street flooding. Neighbors now appreciated the importance of those channels and basins, especially after seeing how close we'd come to disaster. The fear and tension Karen had once sown faded, replaced by trust and collaboration. I occasionally gave presentations to local communities beyond our neighborhood, using High Point Acres as a success story of how not to let personal agendas undermine public safety, and how a united neighborhood can overcome sabotage and adversity. The story of HOA Karen became something of a local legend, a cautionary tale about what happens when arrogance and control overshadow community well-being. As for Karen herself, she served her prison sentence and faced hefty civil judgments. She lost her house, her position, and her reputation. Even after her release, her finances remained in shambles, with much of her income garnished to cover the restitution owed to the HOA and residents affected by her destructive schemes. Despite the bitterness of her downfall, those of us who had clashed with Karen learned valuable lessons in civic engagement and community integrity. High Point Acres went from a place shaped by rigid rules and an iron-fisted leader to one forged by open dialogue, mutual respect, and, crucially, a steadfast commitment to safety. In the end, we realized that a neighborhood isn't just a collection of houses, it's a tapestry of lives, each vulnerable to forces greater than ourselves, be they natural storms or human misdeeds. Our collective effort, guided by reason and compassion, ensured that High Point Acres would remain a peaceful haven rather than a cautionary statistic on the evening news. And so, in the place once threatened by sabotage and floods, we found resilience and unity. The final storm never arrived in the form Karen intended. Instead, it materialized as a reawakened sense of community, one that proved stronger than any deluge of water or misguided quest for control.